equal society.
Yeah.
Richard Drax. Mr. Deputy Speaker, may I also welcome the new member to the House as well. May I refer to the register of members' interests? We are the party of low taxes, or we are nothing. It is a core Conservative value that we believe people should keep more of their money. And in that regard, I commend the Chancellor for scrapping the pensions allowance, and it's rather strange the opposition are wailing about it when they themselves wanted to remove it for doctors, albeit just for doctors. But this reform will not just help doctors, it will help retain head teachers, police chiefs, senior officers in the armed forces, air traffic controllers, prisoners governors, and many others. However, what concerns me is the tax pressure on certainly those who receive less. We are still facing the highest burden of taxation since the end of the Second World War. And personally, I fear we are falling into the socialist trap of raising expectations that the government will provide all the answers. It can't and shouldn't try to. The consequence is higher and higher taxes to pay for services, for example, extra childcare. Now, I entirely endorse the speech made by right honourable friend, the member for Camborne and Redruth, who gave an excellent speech on the issues and problems that this policy could raise. And while welcomed by many, it fails to recognise that if families paid less tax, they'd have more disposable income to pay for services like this, rather than relying on the government. And raising the tax threshold, especially the higher rate, would help in this regard, Mr. Speaker. This insistence that the government can spend your money better is not our philosophy. However, I accept in full that we are paying a heavy price for locking the country down during the pandemic and now dealing with a major war in Europe. But now is not the time for faint hearts and overcaution, especially with the general election looming. For we know, we've just heard, where Labour will take us. A myriad of new taxes, a rise in existing ones, and a party driven sadly by the few, by many, by envy, punishing those who work hard and want to provide for their families. So let's stop reinforcing their values and start reminding the country of ours. On that note, ignoring the many calls for corporation tax not to be raised from 19 to 25%, it will go ahead. Despite being mitigated with some capital allowances, this is a regressive move and a regrettable one. This, after the Chancellor himself pledged to reduce corporation tax to 15% last year, when he stood for the leadership of our party. How right he was then. Yesterday's budget rightly placed great emphasis on growth. And while I'm all for getting people back to work, I'm not in support of hiking a tax on those who create the jobs in the first place. Not only that, but it will be a major and negative factor for companies deciding where to invest and how much to invest, Mr. Speaker. And let's not forget that corporation tax of our nearest competitor in the Republic of Ireland is a meagre 12.5%. As my right honourable friend, the member for Wokingham, has said of an earlier Chancellor, and I quote, Lawson brought intellectual and self-confidence and energy to the task of being Chancellor. He fearlessly slashed income tax and corporation tax rates. Extra revenue poured in as growth improved. And surely that's what business needs. A visionary, conservative government committed to creating an environment which gives the wealth creators the incentive to take risks and to create the prosperity and jobs that all of us in this House want. Unfortunately, this is not evidenced when we look at the oil and gas industries. I will not, because we don't have time and others wish to speak. Pandering to the Green lobby and unachievable targets, they face punitive tax rates, such as 50% corporation tax rate and a 35% windfall levy. As a war in Europe has reminded us, energy security is paramount. Over-reliance on supply from overseas has left many countries, not just us, vulnerable to fluctuation in prices and supply. We're a long way from ending our reliance on fossil fuels, regrettably. So surely it's common sense to encourage investment here at home, not increase our carbon footprint by importing from abroad. And before I conclude, I must mention defence. While the extra $11 billion over 5 years is to be welcomed, it's not nearly enough, with little, if any, of that money going to our conventional forces. This at a time the world is increasingly unstable, Mr. Speaker. Arbitrary figures for defence spending plucked out of thin air by both sides demean our armed forces and us in the House. In the face of some very real threats, a thorough appreciation needs to be undertaken and the defence budget set accordingly. To be an effective NATO partner, we need the mass to sustain a prolonged and major confrontation, and right now we do not have it. I conclude on a point of caution. As I've hinted strongly at the start of my speech, this over-reliance on government providing the solution for everything must stop. It's simply unsustainable. Our Conservative government would do well to recall the words of JFK at his inaugural address. Ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country.
We now come to a maiden speak.